I've been responding to a series of arguments that are made against belief in God, 50 arguments in fact, that are found in a series of links under the title of God is Imaginary. And the fifth of the arguments focuses on the Bible. And what it does is encourage the readers to simply read the Bible, and by doing so you'll discover that it is just a big mess. It has all kinds of things that would be morally objectionable to us today. For example, references to slavery, references to sort of an inferior status for women. It mentions the creation story as being unscientific. And therefore, at the end of the presentation, it concludes with these words, quote, "The Bible is a book written thousands of years ago by primitive man, a book that advocates senseless murder, slavery, and the oppression of women has no place in our society today." So the argument, simply put, is the Bible is an immoral book. It is primitive, and therefore, modern man, or whatever we want to consider ourselves, has no use for it. The article begins with the instructions to take the Bible and just randomly open it, and it gives some examples of what you might find, and primarily there are quotations from Old Testament legal codes, what we might find in the book of Exodus and Leviticus, and then also he refers to the creation story, and then he refers to a text in the Apostle Paul's letter to the Corinthians, first letter to the Corinthians, chapter 14, about women not being allowed to teach in the assembly. And then he concludes from this what I just got through reading to you. This is a very, very complicated topic because it has to do with how we read the Bible and how we understand the Bible. And let me just make a few observations about this, just to set us on a path to answering some of these questions. In fact, my first attempt to respond to this turned out to be too long. It was about 16 minutes long, and I didn't want to put anything that long in here. So I just mentioned that to you as just an indication of the fact that this is a complex issue. A complex issue because the Bible is a large collection of books written over perhaps a 12, 13, 1400 year period of time. And so because it's written over such a long period of time, we have various different eras of history that are reflected in the Bible, and various different literary genres or styles of writing that are used in the Bible. And we have to be very careful in interpreting that. Just like today, it would be wrong to take a poem and read it like we would read a history book. The importance that we have to give to reading literary genres properly is vitally important. That leads me to a very important observation, which is that the Christian understanding of the Bible, and I speak as a Catholic about this, others can speak of their own perspective, but I think it fairly represents the position that most Christians would take on this question. The Bible we believe to be inspired by God. God is the ultimate source of Scripture, but God didn't inspire the Bible by sort of dropping it down out of heaven as a sort of pristine, perfect book in the language of God. Instead, the Bible is a collection of human documents that God inspired. That is, human beings actually sat down and wrote these books using their vocabulary, using their experience, using the genres that were available to them. And we believe that God functioned as the primary cause and the primary moving cause of their writing, and that the human authors, though, truly participated in writing the Scriptures. That means we can find in the Bible evidences of particular cultures, ways of expressing things, and so on. Now, we have to be fair when we approach the Bible and deal with these kinds of questions. We have to keep in mind that the Bible is not written in 21st century America, and therefore the things that we might emphasize today, or things that we might have some special sensitivity to, may not be the things that they're sensitive to. There may be ways of speaking, or manners of speaking, or cultural considerations, or historical considerations that would put in a different light some of the things that we read in the Scriptures. But what we have to keep in mind is, first of all, we can't just randomly open the Bible here and there and think that we've properly understood a text that we're looking at. And that's the first thing that this particular article advocates, is just open the Bible randomly. That's unfair. Secondly, I would want to point out that the Bible is a progressively unfolding revelation from God, we believe. We don't find the same ideas presented at every place in the Bible. God is, we believe, God comes down to the level of human beings in history, in time, and he takes them where they are and gradually leads them where he wants them to go. So the Bible is a progressive unfolding revelation. If you want to use the analogy of our own development as human beings, when we're 3 years old, our parents don't deal with us like they deal with us when we're 15 or 20 or 30 or 50. We are dealt with differently at different stages of our development because we have a greater capacity, hopefully, for listening and learning and acting and understanding what we do. And so it is with the Bible. Historically, it seems as if human beings, hopefully, are growing up to some degree. Now, we still got plenty of problems, and it seems like we, regress and maybe move forward and so on. But certainly, I think it makes some sense to think about human beings as having grown up historically. As a Christian, I believe that the Bible is a crucial and vital way in which human beings have been encouraged and given the insights that they need in order to grow up, in order to mature. So, in looking at the specific issues here, I would want to make a couple more quick observations. Again, there's just too much to say here, but let me make a quick observation here. First of all, the extreme position taken by this article that it's not just an argument that there are some objectionable things in the Bible. The argument here is that the Bible is just a total mess and that it has no redeemable value for us today. It's just too primitive, it's too messed up, it's too immoral. It seems to me that this is simply historically naive. If we look around the world, we will see, just pay attention to your life. If you read books, if you follow the seasons of the year, if you travel, you'll find Christian influence all over the place, inspired primarily by Scripture. If you travel to see the great church buildings of Europe, works of art, if you've seen the great works of art in those churches, if you've been to the great museums of Europe, then you know how much the biblical stories and the biblical texts have inspired the imagination and the insights and the civilization of our world, and how important biblical influence have been in that. If you enjoy listening to great classical works of art, every year I go listen to Handel's Messiah, and in Handel's Messiah, the whole thing is inspired by Scripture and built upon Scripture. And we could go on and on. Great works of literature, Dante's Divine Comedy, and on and on. Time would fail us to talk about how much the Bible has influenced our culture and our history and our laws and our sense of morality, our sense of culture, our sense of identity. And to say that the Bible is simply a worthless collection of books is simply unfair. It just doesn't do justice. And the other issues here, with slavery, for example, when the Bible talks about slavery, it's not talking about what we dealt with in American history in the 19th century, where a race of people was considered inferior to others because of their racial ancestry or the color of their skin. It has nothing to do with the biblical notion of slavery. There we find something that's sort of related to our notion of employment, where someone, because they don't have financial resources or land or whatever that they can work, they work for somebody else, and they essentially give themselves to the work of that person, and then that person takes on certain responsibilities toward them. That may seem weird to us, or that may not seem a desirable way to do things for us, but it's unfair to lump it together with the American Civil War and civil rights movement and so on. These are different sort of questions, a different period of time. Same thing applies with the issue of women. I think this is an unfair characterization of the Apostle Paul. If you gather up everything Paul had to say on this issue, you find that it's much more nuanced than simply isolating the text in 1 Corinthians chapter 14. Elsewhere, the Apostle Paul speaks of the role of women in teaching and the role of women in helping him. And so that's a particular context dealing with a specific issue, and time would be necessary in order to develop that. But it's an unfair isolation of a text in Paul's writings. We could say the same thing about the creation story, holding it to 21st century scientific standards. It's just unfair. That's not the purpose of the account. The purpose of the account is to speak to us of theological truths. And the issue of the origin of the world, or the creation of all things, is still an issue. In fact, the Big Bang, to my mind, only enhances the problem. It only makes it even greater and points us, in my mind, more powerfully toward God as the transcendent cause of the world. So I think the whole argument against the Bible is an unfair isolation of texts of Scripture, that when you carefully and cautiously and sympathetically approach these questions, you can find reasonable answers to all of them.